the main mistake that these organizations make when dealing with situations like this is not stopping them dead in their tracks.
If you're not getting educated about local and national real estate market conditions, market trends, industry news, you're doing yourself and your client base a disservice. This is the Knowledge Brokers Podcast. I'm here with Byron Lazine and Lisa Chinatti. But most importantly, we have got real estate royalty on the show. This would be like a Hall of Famer coming in. Josh Rubin, the #1 resale team at Douglas Elliman in Manhattan, New York City, the most challenging market, arguably, in the country because of no MLS. Josh, thanks for coming on, man, and go Birds.
Of course, my pleasure. EAGLES.
Let's go, baby.
We've been waiting for a long time to have our dear friend Josh Rubin grace us on the pod. So this is going to be a fun one. We've got a whole bunch to get into.
For sure. And Josh has been doing this a very long time. We've all gotten to know each other. We're in a long-standing mastermind, so there's a lot of familiarity here, which is great. What I want to ask first, Josh, and I think this is a challenge that very few people know about that sell real estate, is the lack of a traditional MLS in New York City. I mean, you're selling $20 million apartments. You've also sold like $700,000 studios. You've done it all. You've seen the whole gamut of the market. Talk about how you navigate this and the challenges or maybe the opportunities without having an MLS.
You know, it's interesting that you guys are leading with this topic today on the Knowledge Brokers, because if you go to the UK and in London, the taxi drivers are given a test, and it's what's called the knowledge. You have to exhibit having the knowledge in order to get your license as a taxi driver. The knowledge comes with experience and study of your craft. And so essentially what we do as real estate brokers is studying the craft. You talk so much, Tom, about studying scripts and practicing, and you have a saying that you've used that you don't want to practice with a check, right? You want to practice with your colleagues. And so what we're essentially doing is we're committing to our heads the inventory. And you talk to people like Byron, like Lisa, you talk to people like Tom, like our friend Jill in Jersey City and Hoboken. They have the knowledge of the blocks. They have the knowledge of the houses that are on these blocks, the nuances of the neighborhoods. And so that's exactly what we're doing. And I think that in recent years, with the advent and evolution of the MLS system, people are less reliant on the knowledge and more reliant on the MLS system. And when you come into markets like we're going into now with tight inventory, right? You're going to see people that are less knowledgeable fail. And they're going to fail because they're not going to get creative about how to find inventory. And those of us who actually have the knowledge are going to say, hey, do you remember that house on 123 Shady Lane? Well, those people have been there for 5 years. I'll bet you they're thinking of selling. Then they're going to reverse engineer it and figure out how do we create that opportunity, not only for buyers, but also for sellers alike, because there are a lot of sellers, let's face it, they have their heads in the sand. They think that the market's not great, but it's up to us to let them know it's time to come out. The sun's out. Let's get things started. And so the MLS is a crutch that we've all relied on for far too long. And in Manhattan, guess what? We've never had it. And yes, it's a source of frustration, but in reality, we have a database that we can draw from in terms of history. And right before I hopped on today, Tom, I actually sent a client a listing that I know of because the building and location is perfect for them, and it didn't sell. And I said, we could see this on Sunday. So, the MLS thing, it's an interesting thing, but I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm in favor of not having it. Let's have our own databases that can pull the resources, but let's be more reliant on each other.
So how do you think the clear cooperation debate impacts Manhattan, and what's your position on that debate that was happening second half of last year and will continue this year?
Great question.
what do I think of it? I think that we're all colleagues of one another, right? Regardless of whether we're at the Tom Toole sales group, or the Byron team in Connecticut, or Chinatti real estate. We're all colleagues, right?
I'm gonna
And
change the
so
name to the Byron team, the Lord Byron team. I'm gonna use that.
and so with
Lord
that,
Byron.
we're cooperating with one another. When you come to show my listing, where there is a degree of cooperation. Obviously, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the people that we're working for, and there is some positive to this Ketchmark thing. And the positive is that it makes it much more clear as to who we're actually working for. I'll never forget 28 years ago when I was in class getting my real estate license. The guy who was teaching the class said, "So let's say you're out with a buyer and you're working with them, and you're showing them homes, and who is your customer and who is your client?"
Mm-hmm.
And we said, "Well, our client is the person that we're showing homes to, right?" And he said, "No, your client is the person who's paying you. And so in this situation, the person who's paying you is the seller." And I said, "What?" So the client is the seller, but the person that I'm working for is the customer, not my client. And so it's interesting because it kind of muddied the waters in a little bit, but that was just what was customary. And so we just accepted it. So the Catchmark thing makes it much more clear as to who your client is. And
Yeah.
if you have an agency agreement with a buyer, like so many are adopting recently, then your client is the buyer, and it basically spells out that you're going to do your best to get the commission from the seller, as is often the case. But in the event that the seller has opted not to pay the commission, that you're expecting the buyer to pay.
Yeah, and
So
I love the transparency around that. I think we're all in agreement there. The debate, which probably doesn't impact, and I'm just curious on your position, the clear cooperation debate that's happening right now is you've got NAR, groups like Zillow, other groups obviously saying we want every single listing needs to be on the MLS. Now you don't have an MLS, so you're probably not paying attention to this. Robert Revkin, for example, is a broker on the complete other side. Compass just came out with Compass One, for example, where they say, no, not if a seller, doesn't want to be listed on the MLS for strategy reasons or privacy reasons or something like that, they shouldn't have to be forced to go on the MLS. And so the debate sits between players like a Revkin on one side and Zillow and NAR on the other side. What would be your position on that debate that's happening right now? Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out the pod. We're going to get you right back. This past week, we announced the new BAMX platform, moving over to School, the #1 education and community platform in the game. Check it out with the link down below. Get in today before prices move up in the next couple of weeks. Now back to the pod with Josh Rubin.
my position is really very simple, and I just had a very real-time experience with a client of mine who, for various reasons, did not want to go on the MLS. They did not want to go online, aka the Zillows, truly is street easies of the world.
Was it
Uh,
privacy? Was it like
yeah,
they're a celeb
yeah,
or
they
whatever?
had real privacy concerns. They considered themselves to be very well known, and New York is a funny market. Like, no matter whether you're Willem Dafoe walking down the street or Susan Sarandon or Katie Holmes, people by and large leave you the hell alone. And because they just, even if they recognize you, they'll say, "Oh, look, there's Lisa Chinatti. Bye." So at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter because we're all people. And I think New York really has a high degree of realization that we're all just people. We're not really, the people that we seem to be on the silver screen.
I'm usually
So
looking down to make sure I don't step in a pile of crap. So that's probably why I don't see him. I'm just like looking at the side. I'm looking at my feet.
no,
So,
that makes perfect sense. Fortunately, I haven't had that experience recently, but
Recently.
Hey.
what I can tell you is that if you don't go into the MLS and you don't go online, then there is no way that you are going to get the highest price in the shortest time, which is at the end of the day what the majority of sellers want. Now, there are unique sellers out there who say, you know what? I had a conversation with another client of mine in Florida the other day, and his personal friend is a billionaire, and he has a house that's probably worth 80 to 100 million dollars. And if it were on the open market, it would be 80 to 100 million dollars. And my friend, who I won't go into details, is not a real estate broker, but he had the opportunity to essentially lock this house up for somewhere in the $60 million range. And he came to me saying, hey, I'm pretty confident that we could get 80 for this. You know, why don't I lock it up, and then we can turn around and whisper it and get 80 for it and split the difference. And I was like, you know, I think that we should just put it on the open market. I think we should give them the right advice and put it out to the world and ensure that we get the highest price. Now, coming back to my experience here, I had a client sign up with me, a listing that was probably $20 million a year or so ago. And she didn't want to put it into the MLS. She didn't want to go online. And I said, okay, great. We built a custom website, password protected. I identified the top 300 brokers in the city. I created an email and text campaign. I invited them to come see it, private showings, previews, like whatever you want to do, just don't put it online. We probably showed it 10 times.
That's impressive.
I agree. I'm an impressive person for those who haven't met me. And so we probably showed it 10 times. And then after 9 months, there was, some degree of disappointment that we weren't able to find more traction. We, walked the price down from, early 20s to 18. And then ultimately I said, hey, we really got to put this into the brokerage database. We put it into the brokerage database for a few months. And again, there was not much traction.
Just for context, how many buyers exist for properties in that price point? Because I think you say that, and some of us in lower price point markets just would be like, there's maybe one or two people who could ever even buy that.
Yeah, this is a great question.
There's probably at any given time for a property like that in a certain, prestige location, there's probably 20 buyers about.
So you found half of them all on your own, right away.
Yeah, I mean, right away, give or take. But, what was interesting is then after not getting traction, once it was in just the brokerage database with a specific instruction that we are not to put it on any websites, any outside facing domains, we showed it, another few times, activity picked up a little bit, but then ultimately no offers. So I said, look, if you were my friend, or if you were my cousin, family member, known you for 30 or more years, my entire life, I would say, look, you got to go onto the aggregators. We went onto the aggregators, and it was like somebody hit a switch. Within 10 days, we had an offer, and so now we're about to go pending. So, listen, you hear a lot in every market about things selling off market, and those deals happen. So all I can say is, if I want to get the highest price and be assured that I'm being seen by, the global market, as is the case with our business these days, you got to go online. I mean, you just have no idea where your buyer is going to come from. You think that, oh, I'm selling a luxury property so that I can just go to the luxury brokerage community and get done. That is not the case. People are searching for things at 2:00 in the morning in their pajamas. People get up at 4 or 5 in the morning. They go online. They're flipping through the apps. It's a whole new world.
Yeah, and when you get the listing, your job's to get the most eyeballs you possibly can. But New York City and Manhattan has just, like the stories you've just already shared, has had to think outside the box, where I think the rest of the country has been historically constricted to the box of the MLS and posting that, co-broke on the MLS. That was the changes, obviously, August 17th, where all those co-broke commissions are removed from the MLS. And I agree with what you said earlier about the Ketchmark. Things are a lot more transparent. in New York City, where you didn't have that big adjustment to make, what's happened post August 17? Has there been more, less negotiating on commissions? Or is it like the data that came out this week, I talked about on the Real Word pod, where there's just been really no change on commissions 5 months later?
It's really the latter. The Ketchmark thing put a spotlight on commission structures, but for those of us who've been around for a while, we've known, look, you're not going to walk away from a deal over commission or price, right? I mean, as long as it's, within a certain range of, reasonable. And so when people ask me what my commission is, it's really very simple. And that is, you know, my commission is flexible, but at the end of the day, our goal here is to get you the highest price. So in order to do that, we put it out at this level. And if I do that, then I'm sure you're not going to mind paying the commission. And they're saying, of course, absolutely. So at the end of the day, let's go out at this level and let's try to get you the highest price and focused on that. In the event that I'm wrong and for some reason, there's a disconnect and we want to get the deal done, then we're going to work together to do just that.
Yeah. So nothing's changed in terms of how you negotiate. It's been negotiable before and it's negotiable today, sounds like.
Just like everything.
Before, we got some other stuff to get into, but you want to just take a minute to, people listening, obviously there's a lot of, New York City is the biggest city in the world, a lot of interest on what's going on in that city. What are you seeing from a market perspective in Manhattan right now?
Well, now that we're on the other side of the elections, people have acclimated to the current interest rate environment and ready to get on with their lives. It's not unusual to meet people who either bought or refinanced somewhere between 2020 and 2022 when rates were well into the twos. And, depending on your product, got rates somewhere, between the low 2s and 3%. And so at the end of the day, I spoke to a guy yesterday who has 3 kids, a wife, and a live-in. He's living in a 4-bedroom. He's comfortable in his 4-bedroom, but he could see the need sometime in the next 2 to 3 years, excuse me, for a little bit more space. And, he has a rate of, I think he said 2.3% or something like that. But, what is more important to us? Getting more space and having a better quality of life, or having a low mortgage interest rate just for the sake of saying I have a low mortgage interest rate? Like what good does that do you? Are you going to shoehorn into a 3-bedroom when you really need a 5? No, I mean, if you can afford it, you can afford it. So there aren't too many people who are going to let affordability stand in the way of a quality of life. So as far as market dynamics right now, I mean, we're off to the races. And the spring market always comes early in New York City. New York always leads the recoveries out of uncertainty. And from what I'm seeing here, this is going to be a killer year for all of us who are positioned to really, take advantage of opportunities. This is kind of like a roller coaster where you're, just starting out and you're going up that big hill with that chain, like, and then New York City is that first car where you just roll over and we're like,
Don't go on a roller coaster with Josh Rubin.
Or drive in the middle of the streets of Manhattan. Do we all remember that one?
I've been on the streets and actually,
nobody does donuts better than Josh Rubin on 42nd Street. Okay,
we've done U-turns in the middle of Manhattan, cut off 4 lanes of traffic in California. Yeah, I mean it's the rock star aura of Josh Rubin.
That was 8 lanes. As
8 lanes, I don't know.
As Chris Kwan will attest to.
We went to a show on the west side of the city, and it was, 3 a.m. or something, so there wasn't many people on the road, but it was an interesting ride. There's a lot of interesting rides with Josh Rubin.
I mean, you could call this guy the rock star of real estate. I want to read this email he sent beforehand.
Oh,
so
geez.
Apparently we had to sign a rider to get Josh on. We've got blue peanut M&Ms, a cheesesteak with American onions and peppers from Angelo's. Not easy to get. And 6 ice cold IPAs. Are you already drinking those? I know
you have to
10:30 right now.
You have to read the actual. If you want insight on how Josh.
All right, here we go.
We sent over a calendar invite and just some, hey, here's some simple directions about being on the Knowledge Broker pod. And Josh, and he's never met Haley. So Haley is texting me. She's like, how do I respond to this? I don't know. I mean, I don't even know. He writes, did you have a specific time in mind, or should I reserve my entire day? If the latter, I'll send you my rider, including the blue peanut M&Ms and steak with American onions and peppers from Angelo's, along with 6 ice cold IPAs. Then we can have a nice chat. I've never seen you drink an IPA in my life. So at that point, I knew this is
I have
nonsense.
So
you have?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
At my house, the Blind Tiger we've been to, Josh, a couple times.
Absolutely.
That's a good spot. So
Yep.
yeah, that's.
I've had a half of IPA, and those aren't for me. So
poor
Haley, you had Haley shivering, Josh.
The people that don't know the real Josh Rubin.
That's right. So, all right. So New York City's humming along. One thing you did, I want to just tie back into that on one thing you said. You said, now that we're over the election, I heard from different parts of the country, some people say nobody brings up the election before the election, meaning buyers and sellers. And then you hear others people say that that was an objection. People wanted to wait. You're dealing with a much higher price point than the majority of agents across the country, on the whole. So that level, that price point, does it seem like everybody brings up the election, or just depends on who it is when you were leading up to it?
I mean, I knew that last year at the beginning of 2024, I knew that it was going to be what I referred to as a need-based market. In other words, the people who are transacting in an election year, specifically a presidential election year, are the people who actually have a need. Like, hey, I had a baby. Hey, I'm getting a divorce. Hey, my spouse passed away. Or we're relocating here, or we need to be in this school district for whatever reason. And then the people who are selling, obviously, it's for a specific need. And we did just fine. We kept the lights on, but there was chatter about the election and uncertainty, and sellers were certainly aware of the fact that there was uncertainty, and they would have to sort of acclimate and or adjust expectations. In fact, last year we saw more listings pivot from for sale to for rent, because those people who were trying to sell them weren't able to attain their prices. And if they weren't able to just stay where they were, but needed to actually move, they needed to cover their costs. So I see a great opportunity in the 2025-26 market for non-owner occupied listings. In other words, those listings that were available for rent last year, if we were able to put ourselves in the path of those owners, we're likely to have more opportunities. But I would say, there were people who said, "Oh, I want to wait for the election," but those people who specifically articulated that objection, it's interesting because I stayed in touch with them, of course, and once we got on the other side of the election, it was something else, right? So these are people who just, they're kind of bobbing and weaving, like, hey, hey, hey. They don't really want to do anything. They want to just continue to act like they're interested and treat the home search process like, they're just going to the mall to pass some time on a Saturday.
That makes sense. All right.
Does it though?
Well, I think what Josh is talking about, which
Josh makes anything sound like it makes sense.
This is real though. We've talked about this so many times that motivation matters. Like he's going into 100%. The actual motivation, and you can keep the lights on.
Stopping him.
Yeah, you can have a great year in a tough market because you know what you're looking for. And this is the challenge with a lot of agents. They get stuck working with these unmotivated clients because they're like hoping like, no, maybe they'll fall in love with the home. Maybe this will happen, but they don't ask good questions up front. We talk about scripts all the time. I mean, Josh and I have talked about scripts as long as I've known him. And you got to get to the bottom of what's going on and get curious, or you're going to waste your time in this business. And sometimes you just have to go out with helping people and then kind of see what happens. And but if you don't ask the right questions, you don't know. He's absolutely right.
Yeah,
I agree. He's right. It's just the way that he said it didn't necessarily make sense. But I do agree to the point that I think one of the big things that I always take away is that you've got to know your market enough to understand what the opportunities are, because it's different in each market. So I love that you were looking for those.
Well, it goes back to what we were discussing earlier, Lisa, in the MLS, right?
Yep.
It's about having the knowledge, and to your point, having the knowledge to know what motivates people in specific markets, right? Are you in a
Correct.
suburban market where it's about the school year, or is it something market that might have been affected by layoffs at a certain
Right.
company or
Mhm.
plant? Is a plant opening or plant closing? So.
Yeah, that's all the stuff that's just super important. So, and keeping connected on that is sometimes the decider between success and not success.
Yeah, it's interesting. We all have a friend in common, and Robert Mack, and Robert recently joined what is it, the Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah, he's
Um,
been big on networking. He's done BNI before, all that stuff.
yeah, so he's super plugged into his community and very on top of the comings and goings of the different themes, and there's a lot of like seasonal dynamics, but not just seasons in terms of summer, spring, winter, fall, but also different themes that are affecting your local market. So super important to keep in touch with them.
All right. I got something I want to bring up, Josh.
Sure.
Josh is a prominent. How many years have you been at Douglas Elliman?
Too many, but that said, no matter where you go, there you are.
There you are. So Josh been at Douglas Elliman for years. He's consistently right at the top when you look at New York City. And so Douglas Elliman in the real estate news and the national news has been in the headlines with the Alexander brothers. They've been accused of raping dozens of women dating back to high school. They have state and federal charges. The Supreme Court of the state of New York is one of those places where they're getting state charges. And, if you've been following it, you know what I'm talking about. I'm just giving you the overview there. They're brokers, Miami. They were brokers in New York as well.
Yeah, they
Right. New York
practiced in New York and Florida. That's right.
and Florida. And
And
so,
Aspen, they had an office there.
yeah, so they were kind of doing that expansion team. Kind of like the stories are pretty wild. They're Diddy light stories, or Diddy like, maybe not light, but
Not a good comparison.
Not at all.
not a good thing to be compared with right now. So I've got a couple questions on this, Josh.
I actually preferred Diddy's production to the Alexanders, but
Yeah. So, so has this impacted, like, have clients or anybody brought this up to you saying, hey, you're Douglas Elliman, there's a stain on the company. Has it impacted your business in any way when somebody representative of Douglas Elliman is involved in these types of headlines?
that's a good question. And what I'd like to say first of all is that I'm super blessed in a lot of ways. The first is that I was raised by two wonderful parents. They split up when I was very little, but they were still active part of my life. Love my dad; he's still with us. My mom passed away some years ago, but I was raised effectively by a single mother, and she was an incredible woman, and she taught me about equality in a subconscious way from the time that I came into this world, both in terms of respect for women and respect for people of color. Some of my closest friends to this day are both people of color. My wife is what you would consider a woman of color from Trinidad, and some of my closest friends are among the Black community. So I have both directly and indirectly fought for equal rights for my entire life. And so I've always had a lot of respect for women, and I would never consider doing anything even remotely close to what is being levied against the Alexanders. That said, they're very serious charges and shocking. And the news that came out was surprising to many, but apparently there was some knowledge within Douglas Elliman that this had been going on for some time. The Alexander brothers, just to go on record here, were not associated with Douglas Elliman at the time that the charges were brought. In fact, they went out and were working for a small cloud-based brokerage called Side for the last, I want to say at least 3 years, maybe 4 years.
A lot of their allegations stem to the time when they were at Elliman is essentially.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it had been going on since the time that they were effectively in diapers, right? They were in high school when these
like the
charges were initially.
The DOJ is requesting information from Elliman. So you see Elliman in the headlines anytime you see the Alexanders, even before they, even when they went to Side, you'd see Douglas Elliman because they were some of the biggest agents. Did you know them?
I mean, I knew of them. I was not going out of my way to hang out with them. The dealings that I had with them were not particularly positive, just in the day-to-day, showing of listings and doing deals. I was surprised at how little they knew about how to complete a transaction. I had the opportunity to sell one of our listings in a co-op with them. We ended up having to take over the entire transaction and interact with their buyer to complete the co-op purchase application process. But that said, look, I respected them as professionals and what they accomplished. Tal Alexander is largely given credit for having worked with Ken Griffin of Citadel, one of the most prominent hedge funds in the world, in the singular highest price attained for residential property in United States history, I believe, for $238 million at 220 Central Park South. That said, I don't know exactly how that transaction came together. I have a feeling that Elliman Management might have had a hand in that. And so that said, it happened and he got credit for it. But he's also done a number of other transactions. One of the largest prices ever paid for a property in Soho, that was also Tal. But again, it's about relationships, and I know other people within the business that I respect a lot more for the networks that they've created themselves, because it's entirely independent. It's not based on family connections or management having spoon-fed them opportunities. It's literally ground up. But certainly shocking allegations, and then Elliman has basically been impacted by it. And Byron, you made an interesting point that
they've been impacted by retention, is how I see.
Is this a client-facing issue? And the reality is that the Elliman brand is still intact, and structurally, Douglas Elliman is still the same company, as far as my experience and perception is concerned. On the inside, the agents have been more impacted by it because in the wake of the Alexanders being charged and arrested, of course, we all know that they are not in, the court is not accepting their proposed bail package. No. But Douglas Elliman and its board has asked the chairman of Douglas Elliman to step down in, I think, October. And so that ultimately led to a lot of the top producers at Elliman fleeing the company. So it wasn't the Alexanders themselves, but the aftermath. And so the company has faced some challenges, and I think that it's like one step back and two steps forward. So I think that Douglas Elliman will ultimately come out of this stronger than they went into it, but it might take a little bit of time to recalibrate. And as far as I made this comparison yesterday, and I kind of look at the brokerage model like being almost like, if you know anything about Apple's new campus, from my understanding, it's like a round building, right? And it's multi-dimensional. And so the brokerage model there's two sides to it. And one is the consumer facing side, and then the other is the agent facing side. And so they're both effectively customers of the brand, right?
Yes.
And so
100%.
and so you have to keep
Best way to put
both
it.
you have to keep both happy, but when one is impacted, then it can sometimes bleed into the other. But in this case, what we have is Douglas Elliman has done a pretty good job of protecting the consumer facing side of its business. But it's been impacted by the agent facing side of its business. And so that's going to hurt.
That's a brilliant way to put it. When like the first time I ever sat down with my EOS implementer on basically like, hey, what is your guarantee to the market? I'm like, well, which market? Is it my agents or is it the buyers and the sellers? And then there's a different guarantee you would make to a buyer and to a seller. So even to go another layer deeper on what you're saying, you have consumers. Well, you have two different types of consumers. You have the buyer, the seller, and then you have the agent. You're really selling, or you really have, you put it as customers. You have three customers, your agents, when you're teamage, brokerage, whatever you want to put that as, you have your agents as a customer, your buyers as a customer, and seller as a customer. And those are all different offerings. Those are all different guarantees. Those are all different missions and values.
Processes and all of it. Yeah.
Yep.
And so you're building out three different companies. The other thing that's interesting, and my thought, the reason I asked you that just from the consumer perspective was that, yeah, there's not going to be many consumers. We've always had this belief, and I think this reinforces that a lot of consumers are drawn to the agent, drawn to the team, drawn to the Josh Rubin team. And, that's the brand that they're buying into. But it does show with the internal issues that arise when something like this happens, how much power has shifted over to some of those big agents at particular brokerages. Like look at the Lakers. What's the thing the last couple of years with the Lakers? It's like they just go out and make that Luka Doncic trade to say, oh, the Lakers actually have some control of the franchise. LeBron's not making all the decisions, because the last couple of years, the storyline around the LA Lakers is LeBron James makes all the decisions. So he's the power, even though he's not the owner, but he's the most powerful player in the league. When you have these really powerful teams and brokerages or inside of brokerages, they can start to, influence leadership. That's what happened here. A leader has stepped down. That influences now other agents' decision to stay or leave. And there's just a lot of dynamics at play. So thanks for sharing what you could on that. We haven't talked about it at all. So this is the first time we've hit on that topic. And it's not, listen, Elliman's not the only company going through internal issues like this. You look at EXP's gone through same thing, sexual harassment,
NAR
stories, NAR. Yeah.
Right.
So all of it.
Look, I think the main mistake that these organizations make when dealing with situations like this is not stopping them dead in their tracks.
Right.
When you have a problem, no matter what the production level or
there you go.
the specific role of the person, you got to treat it like a cancer, right? As soon as you're diagnosed with cancer, right,
you cut that shit out.
You got to just get rid of it as quickly as possible.
Unfortunately, I think it's one of the hardest leadership lessons to learn. And I know all four of us on this podcast have made that mistake. And I think we'd be lying if we said we all only made it once or twice.
Agents, past clients don't exist. Unless, of course, you're retiring in 2025, then consider your clients in the past. But if you're building a business for the future, your clients are your clients. This is where Mosaic comes in, the client experience operating platform for you to manage the client experience. See, cupcakes are cute, it's a nice thing to do, but it won't keep a client tied to you for life. It's not gonna bring the value to their home living, home ownership experience for years to come. CRMs work for lead generation, lead capture, and lead communication, while Mosaic helps you transform how you manage those relationships moving forward with the value that they actually need in their home ownership lifespan. So don't wait. Check out mosaic.io or find the link down below. Right, where you're like, do I been with me X amount of years? They've really, I can stack up, 99 things that they've done great, but here's this one thing, and you start to make an exception. And what Josh is saying is the ultimate lesson where no, you can't. Especially when you're talking, this one is so, such a big situation that you've got to.
But you can put it through anything, right? Like thinking about, like, I'm sure part of maybe what went on in their heads with this is like, when you take the action that you need to take early on, there's still going to be a blowback, right? If they had
always,
because they would say, well, how, you don't have any proof of that. You're getting rid of them based on these allegations. Is that what you're saying? If it's too early on without?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's just also the perceptions of like, hey, if I think about it, take this situation out of it and just look at it from a leadership perspective of a team leader or somebody listening to this podcast who's running a team, right? And they're like, if I let Mary go, if I remove Mary from the team, I'm going to lose Jane, and I'm, going to lose not just the money from the initial agent, but the other ones as well. But the reality is, the longer you leave that agent in, instead of maybe just losing one additional one, you lose 4 additional ones, or suffer a reputation hit or something that's even worse along the line, right?
Well, this is what we're talking about, Lisa, which is a step back for 2 steps forward. You're not going to, in most cases like this, you're not just going to be like, oh, let's flick them to the curb and just march forward. I mean, in some cases, you may be lucky enough to have that situation, but in many, you are going to, it's going to be a setback for you, but it's going to be
100%.
It will be less of a setback if you do it now than wait until it becomes a bigger problem.
Correct.
Right? And so, I had the good fortune of walking through a client's home. It's got to be 2-3 years ago, and they were just showing me their place, and they had a big wall of books. Very well educated and smart, very successful people. And I sat there and I looked at the titles of each of the spines, and on the shelf was a book that I had been meaning to pick up and read, but just got distracted by other titles and didn't get around to it. It's called The Art of War by Sun Tzu.
That's a good one.
And so
right over here
in this book, there are a lot of great takeaways, but my key takeaway was that if you have a member of your team who you suspect of being in dissent somehow, or working in subterfuge, that you should get rid of them, and get rid of them immediately.
It goes further than that sometimes in the book.
Yeah.
It comes down to at some times, this isn't a strategy you would use all the time. So don't go into the comments and say Byron is going crazy on us here. But in the book, it talks about a public of some of the most egregious offenders to take the position within a company that this will not be our culture. This will not be tolerated. We're taking a stand here together and removing this very publicly, basically calling that a public.
Exactly.
I don't know if Haley, check if I can even use the word on YouTube, but a public firing, termination, not one where there's a yelling and shouting, but more as a metaphor. And the book has filled with metaphors, obviously, in the sense that this is going to be known by all, that it stops right here, right now.
Exactly. Yeah. And I shortly after that, it empowered me. Reading that empowered me to get rid of what was my biggest producer at that time. It was somebody who was disrespectful. Every transaction, it was like a bull in a china shop. I would get complaints from agents that he worked for, so it was, he was a challenge to deal with and a lot to manage and required a lot of resources. But he was my biggest producer. And ultimately I had to take a step back.
Bill Ravis gave me that book years ago. Maybe he was trying to send me a signal. I'm going to execute you if you don't get in line.
So funny. For anybody who's curious, it's a free download in the Audible library. So, yeah.
Cool.
So you don't even have to pay for it. Free download.
It is a great book. And it's one of, Bill's been in the business 50 plus years. If you know Bill, that's his favorite book is The Art of War. All right. What else we got for Josh, Tom?
We got a jobs report that came in today, Josh. I'm curious what you think about the economic side of this. So we had the jobs numbers came in below expectation, but unemployment went down. What we're seeing, as reported by CNBC and everybody else, is that we had U.S. added 143,000 jobs in January, fewer than expected. Unemployment rate inched down to 4% from 4.1%. And the expectation was 169,000 jobs, somewhere around there. So I think, Byron, you mentioned rates went down to like 6.89 is what you were seeing, or somewhere around there.
Josh mentioned at the top, we had the lowest 30-year fix this week since December 17th. So it was a good week on rates, but we did see today with this jobs report, the 10-year go back up over 4.5. So you may go into the weekend. We record these 10 a.m. on Eastern on Fridays. You may go into the weekend with the rate back slightly up over 7 on the daily read.
Okay.
But economically, just overall, the jobs report was kind of a wash to me, where you see,
I agree,
4% unemployment. So that's down, but less jobs, than was expected. So you have a little bit of a wash. The 10-year popped a little bit. Just on the overall economy, Josh, you are in the financial mecca of the world. What's your feeling on the 2025 economy? Because that's what gives consumers confidence.
Well, look, it's no secret that Trump has historically been good for business. He's been good for the economy. He faced a little bit of a setback with his initial administration, from 2016 to 2020. But at the end of the day, I am optimistic for certainly the domestic economy. There was some saber rattling last week with the tariffs. We'll see what happens with that as we get to the end of the 30-day period here, where there's sort of a moratorium as he and his team are working things out with both Canada to our north and Mexico to our south. But my sense is that we'll get through these minor speed bumps. I think the Fed is going to end up coming down probably another 50 bips in total before we see some greater stabilization in these readings.
What's like the finance bros in the cities take? You probably talk to a lot of finance guys. How do they see the next 12 months playing out?
And I think that there's a sense of optimism, broadly speaking. Bonus pay is out over the last sort of 10 days, basically through January 23rd and February 15th. People are getting paid, and there's definitely a more buoyant sense of
good time to be Josh Rubin.
Yeah. So we're positioned well, and like I said, I'm optimistic. There are more people out looking, and things are flowing.
Good. All right, make sure you guys connect. We'll put Josh. Where do you want people to connect with you, Josh? Somewhere? Nowhere? What? Restaurants, IPAs, where do you want to get connected?
He's a big
middle of
Napster
42nd Ave.
Yeah,
42nd Ave.
212-321-7111 is the office line.
Jeez.
And, Josh@rubinteam.com.
Only call that if you've got a referral for Josh. He's not that active on social, but it was a pleasure to have our longtime dear friend on the pod. Josh, you going to come back? Did you enjoy this?
I mean, I've been waiting for this moment all my life. In fact, Tom Toole has flirted with having me on, and then I've never gotten the official invite because the rest of the team overrode it. But nevertheless, I'm happy to be included in the crew.
Well, who sent you the actual invite?
We didn't have the budget for the M&Ms and the Angelo's cheesesteak.
It was the Angelo's cheesesteak that set it.
Those are hard to get. You got to wait in line. It's a problem.
Josh, how many to get you back on? How many dinners will I owe you? One?
Well, I mean, it
One
depends
dinner
if it's
suffice?
it depends if it's Trader Joe's or Swanson's, but I would say probably 3 to 4.
3 to 4. We'll do a nice dinner in the city next time I'm there, which hopefully will not be for well after the winter.
He's a big David Burke Townhouse fan. That's his favorite restaurant. So if you want to take Josh somewhere, that's the place to go.
The uncooked bacon at David Burke Townhouse is like none
I
other.
still remember. That was
I wasn't
3
even there.
years ago.
Josh,
there.
Anyone visiting the city, this guy knows restaurants like nobody else. What's your top 3 must visits if anybody's going into the city this year for restaurants?
Italian's got to be 56th Street, Il Tonello. I like Bar PD too. It's an honorable mention. That's on 6th Avenue, Bleecker, cash only at Bar PD. Pizza is something that I take near and dear. And I like John's of Bleecker for the classic New York style. Japanese, I always go to Tomo on Thompson Street. You feel like you're in Tokyo. It's super authentic, reasonably priced, and great.
You've never taken me there, so I'd like
fresh
to go there.
sushi. And Dim Sum Palace. They have a number of locations around the city, but super fresh, good dim sum, very reliable. Walk right in. Those are my top rotation kind of. I'm a simple guy. I hate the overly pretentious. I had a terrible experience at Masara a couple weeks ago. It's gotten a lot of great reviews. It's like, just avoid that place. I'm also showing my age, and I'm getting old. Where
hopefully nobody from Masara is hopefully listening this long into the pod. If you are,
We're sorry.
I'm sure it was just an off night.
We accept feedback here, Byron. That would be the proper response.
We accept feedback. I want to go to Tomo. You made it sound very nice.
A lot of the trendy stuff is not worth it. But there are some like old staples too, like Union Square Cafe is great. There's that place that we went to on Lafayette Street, Indochine. That place has been around for a long time, with good reason. So oftentimes these places that have been around for a long time, that they're worth checking out. So
all right. You got a Super
one
Bowl
last
prediction?
question here. Yeah, that's where we want to go. We got the Eagles minus or +1. Eagles money line over under. I think it's around 49. What do you think here, Josh?
I mean, look, I'm definitely going with the Eagles. There's no doubt. I'll see you at the parade.
Josh has already reserved tickets with me for the parade. He's got
Nice.
with the +1. I have room for one wild card. If I know Byron's a huge Eagles fan, so he probably wants to take that spot. So
Haley, who's producing Knowledge Brokers today, if the Eagles win, I told her she doesn't have to come to work on Monday. I only made that guarantee because I know there's just no chance the Eagles win. Kansas City's going to win.
We talk about picks all playoff season.
Haley's coming into
picking
work
against
tomorrow.
the Eagles every time. Well, of course she's coming in tomorrow. It's Saturday. The game's on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean on Monday. I'm already thinking it's on Monday, the day after the Super Bowl. She'll be in.
Hammer the money line, everybody. That's my advice.
All right.
Eagles.
Josh, thanks so much for coming on. We'll have you on again.
Bye, guys.
Great. Look forward to it. Take care. Enjoy the weekend. Go Birds.